again. So now I'm going to talk to you about Firebase, which is a set of tools that Google provides to help people develop their apps. And I'm also going to talk to you about how to make money from your apps, otherwise known as how to monetize your app. This is the contents, just like I said. So I'm going to start out by talking about Firebase. So obviously your first question would be, what is Firebase and why do I, as an Android developer, care about it? So Firebase is a platform that has a bunch of tools in it, and these tools will help you as you're developing your app. They'll also help you grow your user base. So once you get your app up on Google Play, you can use some of the features in Firebase to let more people know about your app and to grow your user base so that more people use it. And of course, a lot of people very interested, how do I earn money from my app? So one thing to know about Firebase is that it's not just for Android developers. It's a tool for app developers. Whether you're an Android app developer or you develop iOS apps or you're a web app developer, Firebase can help you. But this is an Android course, so I'm only going to talk about how Firebase can help you as an Android developer. So Firebase has a console. It has a web-based console, and you do a lot of managing your projects in the console. So the way that you use Firebase is, well, first of all, you have to create a Firebase project. Then you connect your app to the Firebase project. And once you've done that, then you can enable Firebase features in the console for your app, and then you can add code to your app where you need to use the Firebase features. So let's look at how you get started with Firebase. Go to the console, firebase.google.com. One thing to say here is that you do need to have a Google account, like a gmail.com account or a googlemail.com account, to be able to access the console. I'm guessing that most of you who are listening to this video already have an account with Google. If you don't, you will need to create one. You click the Create Project button, and then you choose what kind of project you want to create. So you would create an Android project. Then a dialog box will pop up, and you need to enter some information, the name of the project, and for example, where you are, right? There's not a whole lot of information you need to provide at this point. And then you click Create Project. So now you have a project. So it's just hanging out in the Firebase console, but you actually need to connect your app to your project. So before you do this, you do need to have an app to connect. It doesn't have to be up on Google Play or anything, but you do need to have the app, and you do need to know the package name of your app. Your app's package uniquely identifies your app. So you enter in the field there the package name of your app. Firebase knows which app is connected to the project. So of course the next step is your app needs to know which Firebase project it's connected to. So what happens is that Firebase creates a config file for your app, and the config information is based just purely on that package name that you provided. And Firebase automatically downloads that config file, which is called googleservices.json, through the browser to your computer. So now you have that config file locally on your computer. And this config file contains all the information that your app needs to integrate and connect with your Firebase project. So what you need to do is you need to find that file that you downloaded, find where it is on your local system, and then you simply then you need to open Android Studio and go to your app in Android Studio, and then you just drag and drop that file and you drop it into Android Studio. So there is one other thing you need to do. You need to modify your build.gradle files to use the plugin that's specified in that file that you just downloaded. Now, if you forget where these slides are and you can't remember what to do, you actually don't need to worry about any of that, because when you go through the process of adding your app to your Firebase project, the Firebase wizard is going to remind you and tell you all these things you need to do. But what you will be doing is that you're going to add the ClassPass dependency for the Google Services package to your project level build.gradle, And then in your app level build.gradle, you're going to apply the plugin for Google services. It's 2 small things that you need to do in your build.gradles. Now I'm going to talk about some of the features that Firebase offers. And one of the really cool ones, is one of my favorites, is Firebase Analytics. So what Analytics lets you do is it lets you track how people use your app, which activities they go to, how often they use it, where in the world they are when they use it. You can slice and dice this data. You can get custom audience segments. And the cool thing about it in Firebase Analytics is you get unlimited free reporting. So, let's hope your app gets, millions of users. Well, you're going to get analytics for millions of users. And that would be cool. So the kind of reports that you can get in analytics is you can get geographic information, where in the world are people using my app. You can get demographic information, you can get engagement information, how long do they stay engaged in my app. And if you have revenue models activated in your app, you can get information about the revenue. So, one thing to know is that all this data in all these reports is anonymized and aggregated, so you can't track an individual user. So you can't, say, how did Joe use my app? How did my neighbor use my app? You can't get that level of information. Everything's very, very anonymous. So these reports you basically get without having to add any code to your app other than updating your build.gradle files. You don't need to add any code to your source code. But there may be other kinds of events that you want to track. For example, if you have a shopping app, you may want to track, when do people put things in their cart? When do they take them out of their cart? Of all the people who put things in their cart, how many actually got all the way to the checkout? So there's actually a list of predefined events that you can add to your analytics. But there's also other events that aren't predefined that may be very specific to your app. For example, if your app's a game, you may want to track, how many people get to a certain level, how many people choose one avatar over a different avatar, that kind of thing. Very things that are very specific to your app. And either way, whether you're choosing a predefined event or a custom event, you need to add a bit of code to your app to send the hit to Firebase Analytics so that Firebase Analytics can include that data in the report. So how do you use Firebase Analytics in your app? You do need to add a small dependency in build.gradle to use Firebase Analytics. You will need to check the latest version number there. For the default reports, no need to write code. And if you want to track custom events, you need to add a bit of code. I'm not going to go into the details of how to write custom events. There is really good documentation about that, so I'm going to leave it to you to investigate when you're ready. So the next thing I want to talk about is Firebase notifications. So as you've worked through the practicals, there have been actually several times where you've written code in your app to send notifications to the user, right? You sent a notification when it was time for them to stand up. You wrote notifications so that when they plugged in and out the power, there was a notification. So you've learned how your app can send notifications to the user. But what the Firebase console lets you do is it lets you send notifications to your users. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. So you need to be very careful on your use of notifications. Don't spam your users. Be very careful what you notify them about and how often you notify them. It may be that you've updated your app, it's a very significant update, and you think your users would be really interested, so you can send a notification. It may be that you have a really, really special offer that you want to let them know about, so you send them a notification. But don't send them, special of the day notifications. Don't send them notifications about the offer of the hour, because if you send too many notifications, it becomes spam, it annoys your users, they're going to switch off notifications, or even worse, they're going to uninstall your app. So the way that you send notifications in Firebase is that you write the notification in the Firebase console, and then behind the scenes, Firebase Cloud Messaging delivers your notification to the clients. And the client doesn't have to only be an Android app. It could be an iOS app, could be a web app. This is how you send a message from the Firebase console. You write your message, and then you choose who to send it to. And if you want to send it to users of your app, you choose user segment, and then you enter the package name of your app. And then you click send, and whoosh, off it goes. Behind the scenes, Google Cloud Messaging is going to deliver that notification to all the users of your app. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about Firebase Database. So as you've been working through the course, you've already learned how to save and share data. You've used shared preferences to just save simple key value pairs. You've saved data in a SQLite database. You've learned how to use a content provider to save data and then how to share it with other apps and how other apps can get the data through a content provider. But in the case of the content provider, the app itself owns the data and shares it with other apps. So the app itself is kind of owning the data. But what if you want to implement a system where multiple apps share the data equally? They can all update the data, update in real time. What would you do then? You can use Firebase Database. So Firebase Real-Time Database is a cloud-based database. It uses NoSQL, so you don't have to learn SQL to use it. And it runs in the cloud and it stores and syncs data. So all clients get automatically updated when the data updates. And also when the client goes offline, they get to keep the data. Obviously, they don't update while they're offline, but while they're offline, your apps can still use the data. So Firebase Real-Time Database, I already mentioned, it's hosted in the cloud. Now, data is stored as JSON, and the data is synchronized in real time to every connected client, whether you're an Android app or a web app or an iOS app. If you've got access to this data, you get synced and you can update the data. Here's just a quick look at how you view and edit data in the Firebase console. So one other thing that the console gives you is that you actually can see the data in front of you. And this is probably not something you really need to do when your app's in production out on Google Play, but while you're developing your app, it's really helpful to be able to view the data visually in the console and see how it changes. And if you change it in the console, then it'll change on the clients as well. So this is just an example of what it looks like in the console. So how do you update your app so that it can use Firebase Database? So again, you have to add the dependency, in this case, Firebase Database, to your build.gradle. And in this case, you do have to put code into your source code. So there's APIs for putting data in, getting data out, moving data around, changing data, all that stuff. And I'm not going to go into that in detail. You can look into the API reference. One sort of small example here, and this is kind of pseudocode. In a Firebase database, data is stored in a path, so you can have, it's not real directories and subdirectories, but it looks like directories and subdirectories that go down to the leaf file. It's like I say, it's not directories for real, but it is a path. So if you know the path to your data, your item of data, you basically use Firebase Database, which is the top level class that you interact with, and then you get a reference. A database reference is actually a unit of data, an item of data. So you can very simply get the data if you know the path. So yeah, if you want to go and learn how to use Firebase Database, I recommend you go and read the guides and the API reference. So yeah, I love this one, the Firebase Cloud Test Lab. What this is there's a collection of devices of all different kinds in a Google data center, and you can actually run your app on those devices, and that's the Cloud Test Lab. So once you have your app connected to the Firebase Once you have your app connected to the Firebase project, you can very simply run a test. You just click on Test Lab and you run your test. You choose what devices you want to target, what API levels you want to target, the orientations, the locales. You can click as many or as few as you want. So, running your app in the Firebase Test Lab is a really great opportunity to test your app on the devices that you're intending to target. And then the test lab will actually go run your app on those devices. They're actual real devices, and your app will run on them. I think that's kind of cool. And then you get the results of the test. So this wasn't a terribly complicated test, and we can see that 2 devices passed, and that two devices actually, it didn't pass, but just because the device and the API level were incompatible. Okay, so I talked about some of the features in Firebase, but there's actually a lot more functionality that Firebase offers you. I'm not going to talk about everything because that would be a whole other course, but I'm just going to sort of quickly list them. You can store things in Firebase. I know we talked about the database, but the Firebase storage is actually a different thing. This is just like a place where you can put stuff. You can store images, audio, video, terabytes of data. I mean, we're talking lots and lots of data, right? You can run authentication. Firebase makes it very easy for you to enable sign-in to your app. You can get crash reports. You can enable app indexing, which means that Google will include results from your app in search results, which is actually pretty cool. You can add dynamic links, which means that users can click through into your app even if they don't have the app installed. You can use app invites, which allows users to very easily invite their friends and other people to come to your app. So if they really like your app, it makes it really easy for them to share your app and invite others to come to it. And then there's Admob, and I am going to talk about that. Some links about learning more about Firebase. So now I'm going to talk about making money from your apps. So it's really fun to develop apps. I mean, I love developing my app and running it and seeing it run, but quite often you're not building your app just for fun. You're building your app because you want to build a business of it. You want to get it out in Google Play and you want to start earning revenue from it. So let's take a look at some of the different ways to make money from your app. So at a high level, there's 4 different models. There's the premium model, which basically means that your user must pay to download the app. The freemium model, where they can download it for free, but then once they start using it, there's things that they can buy in the app. Subscriptions, which is where the user pays a fee to keep using the app. And then ads. You let your user download the apps for free, but you show them ads. So a little bit more about premium ads. So this is where you charge the users to download your app. And when you upload your app into Google Play, you get to set the price for it. So this is, I mean, at first glance, this may sound like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make people pay to download my app. But you have to be really careful with this because users often won't download it if they have to pay for it. So, think very carefully about it. It can be a good model if your app is for a very specific purpose, has a fairly small audience reach perhaps, or has a fairly small audience reach and it goes to a very specific set of users. So, for example, if you have an app that's really useful to people who like to practice yoga at sunrise, maybe you would attach a price to that because that would be a fairly small market niche audience. And there probably aren't that many apps that address the needs of people doing yoga at sunrise. But for example, if there's a lot of other apps that do similar things to your app, maybe slightly different than your app does, maybe not quite as good as your app does, but still apps that do similar things, people aren't going to pay for your app if they can get an app for free. For example, there's loads of apps for playing 2048. I love playing 2048. I am the target audience, but I'm never going to pay for it. So freemium apps. So this is where you let the user download the app for free and they can start using it, and either the features that they can use are limited, or they get the full features but only for a limited time, or they get like almost the full features but there's something extra that they could have. And depending how good your app is, then the users will go ahead and pay for the additional features. I generally don't like to pay for apps, but I have got some apps that I've used. I downloaded as freemium and I really like them, so I pay the extra for the rest of the features. So another way you can make money from apps that users download for free is that you can offer in-app purchases. If you have a game, you could offer different power-ups in the game. You could let people buy more Pokemon or more incubators, just for example. And again, it'll depend on the price, the usefulness of the feature that you're offering. I might pay a little bit, a few cents for a new incubator, but I wouldn't pay $10, right? So you have to match the value of what you're offering to the price and make it reasonable. So I just talked about in-app purchases, but you can offer new features, additional content, skins. You can allow the users to customize the look and feel of their game. It's kind of interesting how people do get carried away with like really customizing what their app looks like, and they're willing to pay for that extra special pink shine in their app. New levels, power-ups, attacks. And there are policies around how you can accept the payment for the in-app purchases, so you do need to look into that if you want to go with the freemium model. So a subscription model is where the user pays usually a small amount to keep using the app. So they could pay on a monthly or an annual fee. It's usually a good idea to offer a free trial subscription so that users can try your app out, and then if they like it, they can subscribe to it. Again, there's a lot of people who will not download the app if they have to pay for the app before they've tried it out. Last year when I was doing some training, I wanted to find an app to help me log my exercises. There's a lot of different apps out there. So I tried some for free, and then when I found the one I liked, I signed up and I'm now on a subscription to it. So, and then there's ads, of course. So, one of the models for making money out of your app is to let the users download your app for free and then show them ads. We all know there's no such thing as a free lunch, and quite often the free lunch comes with ads, right? So you can run ads in your app. There's a little bit of code you have to add. There's some boilerplate code where you insert, show ad here, and then Google will insert the ad into that place. And Google has a huge inventory of ads, massive amounts of ads. And when you run Admob in your application, you get access to all those ads. So Google will find the ad. You just make the space in your app for the ad, and Google will find an ad to go in there. And Admob just basically stands for ad on mobile. So 650,000 apps use Admob. I'm sure it's more than that because I wrote this slide a while ago. And Google has paid more than $1 billion to developers in the last 2 years for running ads. And you can put your ad at the top of the screen, at the bottom of the screen, somewhere in the middle. You can have full page ads. But again, as I mentioned with the notifications, you need to be careful with the ads. You don't want so many ads that you annoy your users and they stop using your app. Admob is a really good model for generating revenue and allowing your users to install the app without having to pay at install time. And to cycle back to what we talked about at the beginning of the lesson, you sign up for Admob in the Firebase console. Some links about monetizing your app. So what's next? I do want to mention this. This is a concept-only lesson. I don't have a practical for you to do. But we have some really good online courses that were developed by Google developers. There's a Firebase in a weekend online course, and you can probably guess this teaches you how to learn Firebase in a weekend. There's also the Firebase Code Lab, which was created for Google I/O in 2016, but this is a really good code lab, and to be honest, this is how I learned how to use Firebase, by working through the code lab. And that's it. Thank you.